Alrighty, hello everybody. If you can hear me, just go ahead and pop yes in the chat. I just want to make sure that my audio is coming through to you guys. Perfect. We love to see it. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to a special pre-winter break installment of our ZagTalk 101 webinar series. I'm Anna Sanford, the current office coordinator for new student and family programs, and I, along with my coworker Jordan Cruz, will be moderating the Q&A portion later on. Today, we are joined by Anastacia Lee, a health promotion specialist with the Office of Health Promotion here at Gonzaga's campus. She will be presenting on the topics of mental health and emotional well-being. Following her presentation, there will be a brief Q&A period. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat below. And as always, we are recording this webinar and it will be posted in our communications portal later this week. With that, I'm going to turn my camera back off and turn things over to Anastacia.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you to all of our parents, families, guardians, support systems, honestly, of our students for logging in tonight. So let's see here. Oh, I think I'm on the wrong screen. Bear with me for just a moment. There it is. All right. So as they mentioned, I work over in the Office of Health Promotion. My focus is on mental and emotional well-being and suicide prevention. And this presentation is going to give you a little bit of background on the mental health that we've seen in our students and things that you can expect while they come home from break, things that you can help prepare them for as they return in spring semester. A little bit about what we're going to go over. So touching on our state of the class, as we like to call it at our Office of Health Promotion, talking about how the intersection of all of those identities that our students identify as can intersect and cause more stress or give them a little bit more grace or more of a support system, how all of those identities work together and relate to their mental and emotional well-being. The expectations, like I had mentioned, preparations, and then at the very end, resources and any questions that y'all might have for me. A little background about myself. I have my master's in public health. I finished that right before the pandemic hit. Not the job security I was looking for, but this is the middle of my second year at Gonzaga University. I transitioned from contact tracing last year into a split role of contact tracing with specializing in mental and emotional well-being this year. So I've really seen that intersection between the stress of the pandemic from all of last year and this year, and how that's related to our student outcomes this year. My background is in direct patient care, working a lot in the Spokane area and the hospital systems here, as well as a lot of the nonprofits in town. And I have a personal lived experience with mental illness from my own past. And so that gives me a lot of passion in this subject and a lot of compassion for our students, and makes me want to talk about it more to try and destigmatize that for everyone. So what is Gonzaga's state of the class? And we call it the state of the class because every year we release a report for our staff and faculty to have, and for students to have access to as well, so that they kind of know what to expect as they go into all of their different classroom settings. Things that we've noticed with our students is, as many of us are aware of, high prevalence of depression, anxiety, and stress, the three most commonly reported mental health problems in our students. And we've seen that that's had a direct correlation with the ongoing pandemic. So lots of reports of more symptoms of depression, more symptoms of anxiety, not necessarily knowing how to emotionally regulate and cope with all of those symptoms of a mental health problem. In fact, 1 in 5 of our students has ever been diagnosed and treated for depression, and 1 in 4 has ever been diagnosed and treated for anxiety. So part of our job at the Office of Health Promotion is truly to normalize that mental health will affect all of us at some point in our lifetime, understanding that 75% of mental health problems will begin between the ages of 18 and 24. So in our college-age populations for our students, we want them to be aware that talking about mental health, experiencing symptoms of mental health is part of life, and setting them up with proactive strategies to safeguard that in the future, and not necessarily go into a crisis for every symptom of depression or anxiety, or anytime that they're experiencing stress. But understanding that you can regulate through that, that's going to be temporary, and you can find coping mechanisms that can help you sustain yourself in the future. Some of the things that we've noticed mostly this year, and I don't know if any of you can corroborate this with conversations you've had with your students, but a much larger increase in rage and frustration, especially around the pandemic. So a lot of our students having those kinds of behavioral outbursts, especially at the start of this year, wanting to be done with something that I think we're all wanting to be done with, and knowing that it's still going on. So things that you might expect as your students return is some of that lingering rage and frustration, or lingering depression and anxiety, compassion fatigue, because so many students are just done with being in the pandemic. And I myself am so done with being in the pandemic. So as we're hearing about new variants coming out, that can add into that continued feeling of burnout, of compassion fatigue, of just wanting to check out. And when you have to be a full-time student and they're trying to do internships and volunteer hours and all of these other intersecting identities, can add to their stress. So talking about those intersections, some of the areas that we've especially seen an impact is obviously related to the pandemic. So I don't know how many of you had heard about this, but last year we had over 2,000 students who had to go through quarantine or isolation. That's translated into a large number of our students this year who still have that memory, who still have a memory of being moved into quarantine or isolation, or the fear associated with going and getting a test, or having to sit out of classes. So that's still lingered. We're not out of that yet, and we recognize that. We know that 92% of our students reported increased stress associated with COVID-19. And in fact, that has stayed roughly the same in a survey that we were able to conduct just this fall, with how students are still continuing to be impacted by the pandemic. A lot of students felt and still feel that their sense of belonging, their interest in academics, their ability to cope has all been negatively impacted. Increased feelings of nervousness, anxiousness, being on edge. So things that can also contribute to more academic burnout, especially right now during finals week. And 2/3 of our students were less confident in their goals for after graduation due to the pandemic. So when we think about how our students and their emotional, intellectual, occupational, all of those intersecting areas of their health and well-being, how that's going to translate into the future and their emotional regulation throughout, we need to keep these kinds of things in mind. Some of the main intersecting sources of stress from the last year around gender identity, sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status. We've had our students who have had to, at a very young age, take on a lot of very adult emotions. This is something that's been a pretty constant conversation between all of the professional staff and faculty at Gonzaga this year, is how to let our students be students when they've had to worry about the pandemic, natural disasters, some of the worst forest fires, huge political turnover, and increases in more of those movements like Black Lives Matter, and losing big political figures like Ruth Bader Ginsburg for some of our students. So we recognize that these are also big sources of stress and can contribute to those intersecting identities. And the reason why this was so important, especially for me, is when I was doing a deep dive into all of the data from the last years, 40% of our students didn't know a faculty or staff person to talk to when faced with stressful events. This is something that we've truly been targeting with our staff and faculty, so that our students have someone to turn to, and that's talked about explicitly in classroom settings on campus, so that they don't feel alone when they're feeling so stressed out by everything that's going on in their lives. We know that students who have that on-campus mentor have a significantly better mental health outcome than peers who don't have that. So part of our campaign through this year for mental health resources is promoting that idea of the Zags Help Zags campus and climate, where our students know that it's not just holding open a door, but it's also checking in on your friends. It's establishing those support systems. So having someone that you know you can turn to, not just as peers, but also as capital A adults, as some of the students recently called me. I argued that I'm still figuring it out, but that's also a good example for them to know that you don't always have to have things figured out to be an adult. You just have to keep chugging along, knowing that things are temporary. So the bulk of what I wanted to talk about is things to expect as our students return over break. So when I was talking about all of the increase in rage, frustration, depression, anxiety, stress, that's also correlated with how our students have known how to cope. So 55% of our students in that fall survey that I referenced reported that they had worsened coping behaviors as a result of the pandemic. Students who wanted to have more social connection but didn't necessarily know how to. So trying to find those ways to create movement, which is why I pulled this lovely picture from Rudolph Fitness Center. Finding movement in journaling, meditation, going for a walk, those self-care tips that we talk about all the time. It's more than just your favorite foods and a bubble bath. It's truly finding ways to take the stress that's built up in your system and move it out before it has long-term physiological impacts on someone. So as your students are returning, don't be surprised if they seem really shut down, if this semester has taken a lot out of them. I know that in a lot of one-on-ones and group meetings that I've had with students, we've talked a lot about how there's been this push to a return to normal and going back to a full steam ahead when a lot of our students didn't necessarily know how to do in-person learning from an adjusted 2 years of being a college student for some. And for others, just having a different senior year experience for high school and a non-existent freshman year experience. So we've had a lot of students who haven't learned where those support systems might be or their best support systems and are just very burnt out because they've gone at such a high rate of working 24/7, trying to say yes to everything. And so some of the signs and symptoms of academic burnout that you might see are changes in eating or sleeping habits. And really that could be any kind of bad habit like nail biting, things that your student used to do years ago and might have come back as one of those revert back to your baseline and what you know and what's going to be comfortable to you. You might see that they're feeling excessively depleted, drained, helpless, have a lack of motivation to do things. And I go into this wanting to say that first and foremost, as your students are returning, we want to promote them to rest through this because we do know that they've gone through a very stressful semester. And a lot of our students have also reported that they don't want to hear more about how they've missed out on things and have more of a acknowledgement of the years and experiences that they're currently going through. So meeting your student exactly where they're at and saying, yes, that does sound like it's been a really tough year, and giving that enough validation for them to help process through all this burnout. You might see that they're feeling more pessimistic or cynical, withdrawn. They might have some physical aches and pains. And these are just pulled from a standard, if you Google academic burnout, this isn't necessarily things we've noticed in the Gonzaga population, but we have heard from a lot of students that they are feeling burnt out in general. You might see lashing out at others or intense mood swings. And all of this can also look like symptoms of anxiety and depression and seasonal affective disorder. And so trying to help your students through some self-care tips. That's what I've talked to a lot of students about this year, is how to work through self-care to manage all of this proactively. But giving them that time to rest away from work, building that support system, letting them know that you're still there for them in whatever capacity they need you to be there for. And knowing that this is temporary. Academic burnout is very temporary. So reminding them like, hey, you went through a long semester and that's fine. And we want you to rest and know that you're going to recharge and be better for spring semester. And then we'll go through some strategies in a second for things that I'm going to want all of you to continue to do with your students to really set them up for success in spring semester. If anyone has questions on some of these other signs and symptoms of academic burnout or anything else, please drop them into the chat. So in spring semester, we talk a lot in public health and specifically in our Office of Health Promotion about what it means to have proactive strategies in place, because what we want is for students to have more of that strategy in place so that not every stressful event is going to lead to crisis, because we know that stress is normal and is a normal part of our day-to-day life for us as the capital A adults again. Some of our students don't necessarily realize how temporary some of that can be, or how normal it is to be stressed out on a day-to-day basis. So some proactive strategies that we've been trying to promote with our students is help seeking as one of them. So 4.5 out of 23 of our students in a classroom setting didn't know where to obtain mental health care if needed. And I'm going to preface this with, you may have heard from your students that we're a little booked out as far as counseling appointments go on campus. And that is true. That being said, that we have other resources outside of just our clinical counselors. So we also have our Center for Cure Personalis, and they are a great mediator and friend to talk to if your student feels like they need someone on campus to talk to, because everyone always needs a friend. But 40% of our student body wanted more information on resources. And so I've spent a lot of this semester and will continue to spend a lot of time promoting those resources to our students so that everyone knows where they exist and what each one does. And 20% of our students didn't know where to go if they needed someone to talk to. And so this can be on campus or off campus. And so we also want to promote some of the community resources at the end of this slide. And considering any of the primary care physicians that your students might have at home, setting them up with virtual visits while they're at home is never a bad idea, or understanding that there's some other help seeking outside of the Gonzaga resources if they need it, so that if they're in that moment of crisis and need someone to talk to, they have that care set up. And so sometimes that takes a little bit of that hand-holding that we can provide, or CCP can provide, or you as parents, family support systems can provide, for getting them connected before they return. Some of the main proactive strategies, like I mentioned, rest is huge. Teaching them to take that breath, not feel like they have to be connected 24/7. And I know that that's something that after being remote for so long, our students have a hard time letting go of their work and stepping away from it. So when they're constantly next to their laptop, next to their schoolwork, they might feel like they constantly have to work on their assignments, work on the next step, look for all of those job applications. And we want them to recognize their working hours that are reasonable, because no person goes through life working 24/7. And that's a lot of what contributes to even burnout in our professional lives. So promoting them resting while they're at home, taking that break, is going to be huge. Practice setting boundaries. And this is something that we started the semester with, continue talking about through the semester, but having that modeled for your students, especially over break, is going to be good to have those things established before spring semester hits and be able to maintain them. Because a lot of our students were recognizing, oh, I have this boundary with a roommate that was really crossed. And it wasn't until they crossed that line multiple times that it really started to impact their mental health. And if they had communicated that boundary ahead of time, it might not have reacted or resulted in a crisis moment. So helping your students learn how to say no, advocate for the things that that are like the most important pieces of their character, or really important for their environment to be in, and feeling empowered to speak up and communicate that's going to be something that you can practice over break. I know that some of the experiences on campus were that after spending so long saying no to things or saying, I can't right now because COVID, our students wanted to say yes to literally everything. So feeling really overextended, and feeling like they had to commit to every dinner, every coffee date, every study session. And sometimes it's okay to say, I think I want to stay in my room tonight, or I think I need to focus on this class, or even a boundary of like, I've worked enough for tonight and now I do need my community around me. So a boundary for that personal work ethic of, I need to step away from my computer now. We've also talked a lot about setting boundaries in relationships. So not every friend not every person you interact with is going to be your friend. And some people are going to be a little bit more toxic and not necessarily recognize your boundaries, and saying it's okay to take a pause on that friendship and not say yes to them all the time. And that's taking care of yourself, because no one else is going to love you as much as you can love yourself. The last one that I really wanted to stress is, even with all of the rest that we want our students to get over break, maintaining a schedule and some time management will help them as they come back in for spring semester. For understanding when is a working hour, when is not a working hour, trying not to stay up until 2 in the morning. I met with a lot of students through this semester who reported that they'd only got like 2 to 4 hours of sleep. And I was like, well, how much of that was spreading your spoons out too far? I don't know if any of you have heard that analogy of you start your day with 10 spoons and you give them away. If you're running on a deficit by the end of the day, then you're not going to be sleeping enough for yourself. And that can contribute to being more prone to colds, flus, other viruses that go around campus, not even COVID, just everything else that a stressed out body can be susceptible to. So trying to maintain some normality with a sleep schedule would be amazing. And as far as resources go, so I don't know if any of you want to screenshot this or just watch the recording later, but these are 3 main branches that we refer to for help on campus. So if a student is actively in crisis, we have campus security and public safety, who are on call 24/7 and have access to the residence directors on call, the counselors that we know who are on call, and there's also someone from the Center for Cure Personalis who is always on call to help if a student is going through a crisis or a hard time. Health and counseling services, and I'm sorry, I'm going right to left. Health and counseling services is our clinical counselors on campus. Again, those appointments I think have started, I'm not sure. Maybe booking into spring semester, but I'm not positive on that. But we did know that they got backed up this semester. And that was hard for a lot of our students to not feel like they had someone to talk to when they thought that was their only person that they could talk to. Center for Cure Personalis will usually be able to get someone in within a week. So they will generally have a lot more availability in their schedules. And they also have 2 licensed counselors on their staff who I believe can operate to help get students connected to counselors in the community when health and counseling services gets overloaded. So that does exist in the Center for Cure Personalis also, is that resource that's available for students. and staff and family. And what's really important to note here is that 33% of our students who seek out help on campus do self-refer. So trying to have those conversations with your student that, hey, if you want to talk to someone, that's okay. And so trying to destigmatize that for your students as much as possible, talking really openly about mental health and seeing how they're doing, asking open-ended questions to see how they're processing through their burnout at the end of the semester will give you a good baseline for knowing if they want to talk to someone in a professional capacity, or if they just need to develop more of a support system or better coping mechanisms as they return. Oh, wrong direction. The resources in the community that we like to promote are Frontier Behavioral Health and Lutheran Community Services Northwest. So they usually have other availability with licensed professionals who can help students if they're seeking someone in the community. And for any of our students in crisis, we like to highlight all of these different lifelines, text services, chats. I know the crisis text line in particular has an active chat now that goes 24/7. We also have, there's a free app now called Comharm. If you notice that your student does appear to be in crisis over the break, Comharm is a great app to download that can help them regulate through whatever that crisis moment is. So if they need a distraction, if they want to talk to a professional, wherever their mindset is at, it helps get you through that moment, because that is going to be a temporary moment. It recognizes that thoughts, ideas, that's a normal part of stress, but it prevents action on that, which is really important. And if anyone has any questions in particular for our office, this is our contact information. You can always reach out to ohp@gonzaga.edu or connect with us on Instagram or TikTok at gonzaga.ohp. And I say TikTok even though I don't even have a TikTok, so not sure how many people are on that. But I wanted to leave a lot of room for questions with this, because I know that, as we're all well aware, mental health has been really difficult for all of us. And especially with all of your students, I know that you probably have some questions for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Anastacia, for that amazing presentation. We did get a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and start us off with one of them. How many students do counselors and mental health professionals on campus usually see a week? And then do students have access to any group programs for specific mental health issues?
So going off of that second one first, we are getting our master's in counseling students in peer-to-peer support groups. So that is something that is going to be a part of spring semester. If not from them, then they're definitely going to be running groups out of health and counseling services. As far as how many students are seen, I know that CCP, each case manager will see 5 to 6 students in a day. I'm not sure how many students are seen in a day by the counselors at Health and Counseling Services. My supervisor is also on the line, and she might be able to provide a little bit more information on that particular one. Jenna, I don't know if you could unmute. Aha, at least 5 to 6 students in counseling each day between each counselor.
Okay, moving on to the next question we got in here. Where or who can students go to in case of a crisis for immediate help? And then what does this process look like after the crisis has been determined?
So for a student in immediate crisis, we always recommend contacting, let's see here, the CSPS, so Campus Security and Public Safety first. They will have access to the residence director if your student lives on campus. They'll have access to the RAs and the counselors, both in health and counseling services and Center for Care Personalis. We make sure to get students connected, and this is speaking outside a little bit of my realm of expertise, because I don't do direct student interactions as far as crisis management goes. But I do know that they do a lot of follow-up with our students after that happens. So making sure that someone is with them as an expert while they're going through crisis, and then following up with them after to set up like safety plans and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. Another question we had is there a staff member at GU or just any general resources that can help parents who are trying to find their student mental health support in the community? For parents who are either not from the area or generally just lost in trying to find support for their student.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that going to this gonzaga.edu/refer, that's under the Center for Care Personalis, that connects to a lot of staff at Gonzaga who can help for those general community resources too.
Perfect. Moving on to the next question. Can a HIPAA release form be signed by a student at any time? And if so, what does that process look like?
Sorry, that just cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yes, of course. Can a HIPAA release form be signed by a student at any time? And what does that process look like for the student and their parents?
Oh gosh, going back to, so this is going to be a harder pull for me because this is from the contact tracing at the start of last year. I believe that they can sign the HIPAA release at any time. I think that they would have to go through health and counseling services for that. And all of the providers at health and counseling services can help to facilitate that for the student and the family.
Great, thank you. Next question is, are there any stress reduction programs that include meditation or other types of support?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually do a meditation Monday through our office, which goes the first Monday of every month. We meet over in the Hemmingson Meditation Room and help lead a usually 15 to 20 minute guided meditation for our students. Those can also be scheduled out as a program with any of our student employees, I believe. I think we have that listed on our programs. So I would say reach out to our Office of Health Promotion if you have a student who's looking for more of that guided meditation.
Perfect.
Also, sorry, I'm watching the chat at the same time. There's also a student club for meditation.
Yeah, I saw that on some of the bulletin boards in College Hall that they've been meeting every Thursday. So that is another option. I also just wanted to hop on and remind everybody that we are recording this session. So if you hopped in late, don't worry. The recording will be posted in our communications portal by the end of the week. But moving on to the next question, somebody in the chat wanted to know a little bit more info about the Comharm app that you refer to, details about that app, if you have any.
So free to download. I believe it's in all app stores. Here, let me pull up mine. So yeah, if you're having a crisis, you can open that up if you feel like you need someone to talk to or a distraction. For myself, I know that when I had gone through my past experience with suicidal ideation, having that way of kind of regulating through those thoughts and feelings was really, really powerful. So to know that that exists in an app now is really nice. So you have options between if you want to listen to a like sound or a story, or if you want to do an activity on the app. It does also connect you to professionals if you want. You have an option between a comfort, a distraction, getting to express yourself, finding some sort of release or connection. So those kinds of things can help our students who feel like it's permanent and feel like that all-encompassing feeling of dread is there to stay, helps you get through that. They reference it as like riding the wave in this app, I think, because it is a wave that's going to pass over you. Yeah. So I haven't heard of anyone on our campus downloading it yet, but I try and promote it in all of my presentations because it's free and really useful, honestly. I wish it existed when I was going through my past.
Great. So we had a question, and this one is slightly different from a student in crisis scenario. But what would be the step-by-step process in case their student is experiencing something like a panic attack? Basically, what can they do to support them in relation to programs on campus and just general steps that parents and families can take?
For a student having a panic attack, that is a little bit more reactive than I normally talk about, honestly. But what we would recommend if a student is having a panic attack, because having gone through that personally, I would recommend calling CSPS first, because that kind of physiological can't breathe, chest really tight, that's something that I would want to have more of a medical professional than myself step in on to help regulate through that. And I do know that our case managers follow up a lot with students who have had panic attacks. And so that would be over again at the gonzaga.edu/refer. And they would be able to help a student who's suffering from panic attacks get through that. But
Perfect.
some of those, some of those physiological symptoms, if you don't have access or you don't call CSPS to start, that can be really hard on anyone.
We are getting a couple questions in the app. Just to confirm, it's called the Comharm app.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Glad we were able to confirm that for everybody. The next question we have, is there a plan to expand counseling services next semester or into the future beyond that?
Again, above my pay grade. If I had my way, we would hire all counselors. I certainly hope so. I would recommend that your power as the parents, guardians, like support systems of our students, message that in, because the more people who like request that, demand that, like, again, I only have so much purchasing power as myself in my second year here, but the more that they hear that, hopefully the more counselors we can onboard. But I personally can't promise anything. I wish I could. But I will say that we do recognize the need for that. And I believe that we have a number of professional staff, myself included, advocating for more counselors. I think I saw Jenna put this into the chat at one point, that we do also have a contract counselor who sees some of our students too.
It seems that we're having a bit of confusion in the chat over the Center for Cure Personalis and CSPS and Health and Counseling Services. So if we can just clarify what all of those mean one more time for our attendees.
You got it. I know when I first started at Gonzaga, the acronyms really got me. Center for Cure Personalis is our non-clinical case managers. So if you need someone to be a friend and mediate like those resources on campus, they're a great place to start, is how they always market themselves. A student can start there, talk through stressors that they're having. It might not be that they need a clinical counseling appointment. Sometimes they just need some validation of the symptoms that they're experiencing, but that's not necessarily the treatable disorder that you would want to go see a counselor for, potentially. Or maybe you want that stepping stone before a clinical counselor. So health and counseling services is going to be the clinical licensed counselors on campus operating in that capacity. They're the ones, if you've heard about there being a backup, they're the ones who were having a lot of those appointments. Campus Security and Public Safety is CSPS. They are the 24/7 on-call person on campus who can go help a student who's living anywhere nearby. And Phil, the person in that picture, is amazing. And I know that all of the people in CSPS that I've worked with have been really lovely.
Since we're on the topic of CSPS, we did just have a question of how could parents or families reach CSPS if needed?
Phone number, definitely phone number.
Perfect. So we'll go on to next question. There was a support by a parent or family member of where can parents express their support from our mental health services on campus?
Let me see here. Jenna, this one I might try and refer to you if you're still available. As far as resources for parents go, I would love to email that out to people if I knew. I'm currently not sure what all of the channels are at Gonzaga. So I would love to pass on that one for a moment, but also, parent and family essentials.
This is a publication put out from our office. If you give me one moment, I can go ahead and find a link to last year's copy and link that in our document. While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question. Is it fairly common for students who are feeling anxiety to skip multiple classes in a week?
Potentially. I can't speak for every student's experience. Every experience with anxiety, depression is going to be different. What we would want is for students to have a better understanding of how to cope potentially, and also have a relationship with their professors that they can message that in. So we always recommend academic advising and assistance if someone needs help talking to their professor about that kind of thing. So understanding that we want to be a community that treats mental health and physical health in the same kind of capacity. So we want to be able to treat depression and anxiety and those invisible illnesses exactly like we would a broken ankle, a stomach flu, anything like that. So if they're having one of those bad mental health days, we would want them to feel comfortable enough reaching out to their professors to let them know that. And then continue with those proactive ways of how can you continue to stay on top of your mental health. And if you want, like if you're in a help seeking pattern, how can we connect you to a good resource to help regulate that? Yeah.
Okie, we did have one more question for students that aren't maybe comfortable reaching out to campus security and public safety for their own personal reasons. Who do you recommend they reach out to next if they are in that crisis scenario?
And they don't feel comfortable connecting to campus security and public safety. They also act, so that phone number also acts as the operator. And if they need to be connected to the counselor on call, they could bypass the idea of like a campus security person showing up and be connected more into one of the counselors who's on call. So let me also pull up. If a student's also in that kind of crisis, you have all of these trained professionals from the crisis lines that are available 24/7.
Great. Another question we have is, how does the drinking culture impact the mental health of students on campus?
Well, I think with any amount of like substance use, you can see that potentially increase in correlation with mental health problems. I have focused mostly on how students have been processing through the pandemic, and in what we've noticed, there hasn't been like an outside of the normative data increase in any amount of like unhealthy substance use. So at least from the data that I've reviewed. But that if you do have a student who's having symptoms of a mental health problem, then that is something to always be aware of.
Okie dokie, moving on to the next question. What mental health campaigns have you had in the past to promote mental health, and are there any campaigns planned for the future?
Yeah, so this year especially, I've been focusing on still suicide prevention and awareness. So that's a campaign that's going to be continuing into next semester and giving students some tangible skills for how to talk about suicide. One of the big campaigns has also been about promoting BIPOC mental health on campus and the equity in mental health resources for all of our marginalized students. So not just BIPOC students, but also LGBTQ plus students. That's a campaign that I'm also going to be highlighting all of those unique experiences and how to be a good ally in BIPOC communities and LGBTQ plus communities. We also have a student employee who's been running a campaign on the intersection of the pandemic with different BIPOC subpopulations and how that's affected their mental health between the intersections of all of those. As far as programs that go within the residence halls, we have one on self-care, how that relates to community care, how to take care of yourself and the community around you. We have one on how to be okay with failing with grace and failing forward in a sense. How to promote more sleep and rest in your day-to-day basis and learn how to say no. I give a lot of presentations on self-care, setting boundaries, all of that kind of stuff. So those are campaigns that are all going to be continuing into next semester.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, what can a parent do if a professor refuses to recognize a student that is having a crisis?
I would recommend that they connect with, honestly, one of the either academic advising and assistance or the Center for Cure Personalis, because it's not, in our mission, we promote care for the whole person, right? That's something that we want all of our staff and faculty to live into. And that's not something that I personally, as a professional staff member, would expect any of the students that I work with to have to police a faculty member on living into their own mission. And so calling in a professional and an expert on campus to help that student advocate for themselves is the step that I would recommend. Because something that we like to stress is that our students do not have to be the expert on everything. And we have a lot of resources at Gonzaga, and that's exactly why.
Perfect. We have had a couple questions in the chat, and Jenna has talked about this a little bit, questions about in-person versus virtual resources. And she has said in the chat that they do offer in-person and virtual meetings with counselors, both at your office and at Health and Counseling Services. I also was wondering if you would touch on the mental health toolkit real quick that I know is on your website, because I believe that's a really good virtual resource for people.
Yeah, so OHP's Wellness Toolbox, if you just go onto the gonzaga.edu webpage and search Wellness Toolbox, it's the first thing that pops up. It gives students access to videos, articles, communities that they can be a part of and find some like tangible skill sets in, or learn more about different things. So we have a range of different topics on there, from like stress, anxiety, depression, to like identity and inclusion, eating disorders, sleep, healthy relationships, alcohol and drug use. So all of those different resources virtually are available on that Wellness Toolbox. Thank you.
Okie doke. We've also had a couple questions asking where they can direct their concerns for having more mental health resources on campus. I'm pulling up their emails right now, but the president's office as a whole, and then the provost's office, Dr. Kent Porterfield, is also helps with areas like this. So I'm going to be finding their emails and putting them in the chat real quick. See what else we have in this question. Again, we have another question about where this recording will be posted. It will be posted in our communications portal. This is how you found out about the webinar to begin with. So another push will go out with the link to the recording. Let's see. If you have any specific questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I know some people are voicing their concerns in the chat as well. Again, we will be recording the chat as well, so we can collect these concerns. But again, if you have any questions, we'll be on here for about 8 more minutes if you have any extra questions. But for now, I'm going to be finding those emails and putting them in the chat for you.
Also, other questions that you have for our office specifically, again, our contact information is up on the screen now. And we always welcome like any trends that you're seeing with your students. We do a number of face-to-face, like trying to connect with our students so we can meet them wherever they're at. But you also are going to spend a really significant amount of time with your students in the next month. So if you're seeing anything over the break that you want us to focus on in programming, please email and let us know that there's a trend going on, because we love to have like data informed approaches for everything that we do.
Okie dokie, I have put that first email in the chat for those that are asking, and we'll be funding the provost email now.
I just saw another question pop up. So, will CURE personnel in the Counseling Center be made aware of all the concerns, questions, and needs discussed in this chat? I believe so.
Yes, I'll be gathering everything that has been discussed in this chat, compiling it into a document, and then I'll be sharing it back with the Office of Health Promotion after this webinar. It might take me a couple days to get everything compiled because it is finals week and I'm a student employee, but we'll get it to the Office of Health Promotion. And yes, for those that jumped in late, we are recording this and it will be posted in our communications portal later this week.
And again, thank you everyone for attending. This has been like the hot topic that I didn't think mental health would be such a big hot topic, but truly I know for my own personal mental health, it's been something I've thought about over the last year and last 2 years. That's weird to think about. But all of you are some of the first connections and support systems that our students have. And thank you for taking the time to be on here for this.
Yes, and I echo those sentiments as well. I have put that second email in the chat for the Vice Provost of Student Affairs, Dr. Kent Porterfield. His email is in there as well. We're going to go ahead and stay on for about 2 more minutes for those that have any last minute questions. And then after that, we will be wrapping things up and closing down the webinar. Okay, one more question about the recording. Like I said, we are recording this webinar. Once I finish editing it, I'll send it over to our program coordinator and we'll get that posted in our communications portal. And a link will be sent out via email so everybody can have access to it. With that, I am gonna go ahead and close out our special pre-break ZagTalk 101 webinar. A huge thank you to Anastacia and Jenna in the chat helping with all of those questions. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate the work that you do for us students and the campus community. So thank you and enjoy your break.
You too.